Hilchos Shechitah Perek Revi, the laws of ritual slaughter, chapter 4. Yesterday we learned the 5 things that are mafsidat hashchita, the 5 things that disqualify slaughter. In chapter 1, the Rambam said that if you look in the verses about Shechitah, it doesn't say anywhere in the Torah how to slaughter. Instead, you're left with a bunch of questions. Where do you slaughter on the animal? How much do you have to slaughter? What time do you slaughter? One of the questions was, what disqualifies the slaughter? That was yesterday's chapter. And the final question was, who is allowed to slaughter? And that is today's chapter. Today's chapter, chapter 4, is going to answer the question of who is allowed to do Shechitah. Says the Rambam Halacha Aleph, Yisrael she'ena yodeya chamisha dvarim shemafsidin es hashchita. If a Jew doesn't know the 5 things which disqualify a ritual slaughter, or any of the other ancillary laws of the laws of Shechitah which we explained, and he slaughters an animal privately with no supervision, Sunday morning, have to forgive the noise, the background noise, then it's forbidden to eat from food that he slaughters. He can't eat it, nobody else can eat it because he's not expert in the 5 things. So here we have a shochet. If in his mind he knows, I don't know what I'm doing, he doesn't really know the laws, then the Shechitah is actually pasul, it's disqualified. It's close to being considered a doubtful nevela. Now, in other words, we don't know for sure because maybe he happened to do it right, but since he doesn't know what could disqualify the Shechitah, it's problematic. If a person eats an olive-sized portion from such slaughtered meat, you give him rabbinic lashes. Even if we watched him slaughter 4 or 5 times a kosher shechita, and we even checked this shechita, which he just did privately, and it's proper and it's complete, it's forbidden to eat from it. Since the bottom line is this guy doesn't know the things which disqualify a shechita, it could be that he'll disqualify the shechita without knowing. Maybe he'll do too long of a pause, or he'll press down the knife. These are not things which you can see when you check afterwards. All you see afterwards is if the pipes were slaughtered properly, but you don't see how they were slaughtered. If in the moment of the shechita he pressed down the knife or he waited too long, it disqualifies the whole thing. Or he'll slaughter with a bumpy knife without realizing, and these are things which have to be seen in the moment. If you don't see them in the moment, there's no way to supervise them. The commentaries say that if somebody was watching him in the moment, if an adult was watching him, not an adult, if a proper Jew who was qualified, shochet, was watching him, then it is kosher. Halacha Gimel, says the Rambam, that's only for a Jew who doesn't know the laws of Shechitah properly. What about Yisrael sheyedeya hilchos Shechitah? What about a Jew who does know the laws of ritual slaughter? So you would think maybe he has the authority to do whatever he wants. Says the Rambam, still no. A Jew who is familiar with the laws still initially should not slaughter privately. Before he slaughters in front of a sage who's expert in the laws of Shechitah many times, till he becomes also expert and very used to doing Shechitah. However, if he just goes ahead and slaughters privately, we are going to trust his Shechitah because he knows the laws of ritual slaughter. Somebody who knows the laws of Shechitah. And he did Shechitah multiple times. He slaughtered in front of a Torah sage till he became expert. It was like second nature to him to slaughter properly. Hu hanikra mumche. He is called in halacha proficient, professional, expert. The moment you have the title mumche, the moment you have the title expert, you got tested, you got today what's called Kabbalah, a special handoff from one shochet to another one, you get a certificate, then you are considered to be an expert. When you get an expert, you can slaughter even privately. Va'afilu nashim va'avadim, even women, according to the Rambam. Even a woman, even a slave. Im hayu mumchin, if they learned the laws and they became proficient, they became expert in the laws of Shechitah, hare'elu shechatin lechatchila. They can slaughter as an initial option.
Evet Yehudi.
Yes. Yes. An Eved who went through the mikvah process, he's like a half a convert, and he can slaughter if he knows, according to the Rambam. In the Ramah, in Shulchan Aruch, it says that a woman should not slaughter lechatchila. As an initial option, we don't have them shech, but according to the Rambam, they're actually able to slaughter. Halacha hey cheresh shaita v'katan, a deaf mute, a mentally unstable person, a child under bar bat mitzvah, v'shikar shenisbalbal adaita sheshachatu, or an intoxicated person who lost his mind. Not just he had a drink, he's out of his mind. And they slaughtered shchitasam psula. The slaughter which they do is disqualified. They don't have an awareness, and maybe they're going to ruin the shchita in the moment. Therefore, if such a person slaughtered in the presence of somebody who knows the laws of shchita, and he watches, he supervises this drunk guy slaughtering, and he sees him slaughtering properly, or he supervises the mentally unstable person or the deaf mute, and everything is kosher. Shchitasam ksheira, the shchita is kosher. This is the halacha where the commentaries I mentioned before, they learn out that in the first halacha as well, if the Jew is unfamiliar with the laws of shchita, if somebody was supervising him, he can slaughter and it's okay. Halacha vav, misha eina yadua etzleinu. What about somebody we don't know his status? If we know he's unfamiliar, he can't slaughter on his own. If we know he's familiar, he could slaughter on his own. What if we don't know? Sheshachat b'nei levin atzma, and he slaughters a chicken or a cow privately. So we test him. We ask him some questions. If it turns out that he knows the main laws of ritual slaughter, it's kosher. Now what happens if this happens? We see a Jew from far, we see him slaughtering an animal, and he walks away. We don't know who he is, and we can't test him. He's leaving town. Just as we see him slaughter the animal, he walks away. And we don't know if he knows or not. Harezu muteres, by default, it's considered to be permitted, and we'll soon see why. A person tells an agent, go out, I know you know how to do shechitah, I know you know how to slaughter, go out please and slaughter my korban pesach, let's say, or go slaughter my animal for dinner. A few hours later you come back, you find the animal slaughtered. You don't know if it was your agent who you appointed to slaughter, did he do the slaughter, or maybe somebody else. Again, it's permitted. This is the Rambam's principle here. Most people who deal with slaughter can be assumed to be proficient. In other words, nobody would go with a knife to an animal and slaughter if he didn't really know what he was doing. So therefore, when you know for sure that he doesn't know, disqualified. But if you're in doubt, you can rely on the rov, you rely on the majority, and it's kosher. Halacha ches, avad lo gedi ay tarnagoil, umitzoi shachut babayis. You had a pet goat, or you're a farmer, you have a bunch of chickens in your backyard, and you lost one. You lose track of one of them. A few hours later, you find it in your house, slaughtered. Mutter. You can eat it.
Who did it?
Who did it? You don't know. But probably we rely on this rov, again, on this majority. Most people who deal with slaughter are experts. If you found your lost goat or your lost chicken in the market street, then it's forbidden. The chances are that it was a non-kosher shechitah. It became a nevela, and that's why it was thrown away in the market. Also, if you find it in a dung heap, a garbage heap in your house, it's also forbidden because the assumption is, why is it thrown away? Probably it was an unkosher shechita, and therefore it was thrown away. But if you find it in your house regularly, totally permitted. By the way, in Shulchan Aruch it says that these last two cases, where you found it in the market or the garbage heap in your house, it's also permitted. Shulchan Aruch is even more lenient on that. Yeah. Halacha tes, mumche shenishtatek. If you had an expert shochet that becomes mute, something happens and he goes through a traumatic experience, he can't talk anymore. But he can still process, he still understands, he can still listen, he can still hear, and his mind is sound. Because he's an expert, he can still slaughter initially. Somebody who's just deaf can slaughter. Deaf mute cannot, but regular deaf person, he can slaughter. Halacha yud hasuma, what about a blind person? He shouldn't slaughter unless people are watching him, supervising him. Fascinating. If a blind person slaughtered, it's kosher. Because bottom line is he did a kosher shechita, no reason to make a difference. So he couldn't see. So what? If he did okay, it's okay. Yud Aleph, Ovid Kechavim Sheshachat. If a Gentile, an idol-worshipping Gentile slaughters, Afal Pisha Shachat Bifnei Yisrael Besakin Yafa. Even if a Jew was watching him and it was a good knife, everything. Va'afilo hayakatan, even if it was a child, so where there's no worry of idol worship and he's not even mature to have these idolatrous thoughts. Shchitasei nevela v'loika lachilasa min hatayra. Whatever he slaughtered is considered to be dead, non-kosher meat, and if you eat it, you get lashes, biblically. Shenemar, look what it says here. The Torah warns, next week's Parsha, the Torah warns against making a covenant with people who settle in Israel, the 7 nations. Why? Because you're going to go after their gods. V'kara lecha v'achalta mizivchai. He's going to call you, he's going to invite you, and you're going to eat from his slaughter. Me'achar shehiz here. Shema yechal mizivchai. From the fact that Torah warns against eating from his slaughter, atalamed shezivchai asur. You can learn that the slaughter is forbidden. It's not like a Jew who doesn't know the laws of Shechitah, where we said you shouldn't eat it, but it's like a nevela, we're not sure. This is actually nevela. Torah says clearly that his slaughter is totally forbidden. V'gader gadol gadru badavar. And the sages went even further and made a huge fence. Even if you have a Gentile who we know doesn't serve idols, let's say he's a ger toshav, he took upon himself the 7 Noahide laws, doesn't matter. Once a Gentile in that way, always a Gentile, shchitase nevela. Any slaughter that he does is totally nevela and totally forbidden to eat. Halacha Yud Gimel, what if it's a little partnership? The idol worshipping Gentile began to slaughter less than the proper amount, and then the Jew finished it. Or the Jew started and the guy finished. Psula. It's disqualified. Why? This is a big Talmudic principle that Shechitah is considered to be one act from beginning to end. So if part of it was done improperly, it disqualifies the whole thing. But if the idol worshiper, all he did was slaughter the animal in a way which wouldn't have disqualified it even in its lifetime, like he only slaughters halfway through the windpipe. That's all he did. Yesterday we learned that halfway through the windpipe, an animal can survive. So it isn't even considered the beginning of Shechitah. Yes, Shechitah, the act of ritual slaughter, is one act from beginning to end. But as long as you don't cross the threshold of halfway through the windpipe, the Shechitah hasn't even started. It's simply a circumstance happening to the animal. And therefore, if the Jew finishes after that, the Gamar Yisrael Arezuk Sheda. If the Jew finishes that act, then it's actually kosher. Halacha Yudalad Yisrael Mumar La'aveira min ha'averos. If a Jew is an apostate, that means he's purposely violating a specific aveira, shahaya mumche. But he was also happened to be an expert shochet. So let's see what happens. He's a Jew. He learned the laws of Shechitah, but he's a mumar. He's an apostate for a specific aveira. Harei ze shochet lechatchila, says the Rambam. He's allowed to slaughter, no problem. V'tzarich Yisrael Kosher livdek hasasakim. As long as a regular Jew checks the knife, the achar kach yitnena lemumar zel lishchitba, and then give it to this heretic to slaughter with it, that's okay. He has a presumption that he won't bother to check the knife. But if you check the knife for him, he's good. Oh, there's some exceptions. But if he was an apostate to idol worship, or he would publicly desecrate the Shabbos, or he was an apikairos, a specific category of heretic, he denies the Torah's divinity, and he denies Moshe Rabbeinu's power of prophecy, as we explained in the laws of Teshuvah. That's like a regular Gentile. His slaughter is totally disqualified. Any other sin, he loves to eat non-kosher meat, let's say. That's fine. As long as the Jew checks the knife, he's good. Tesvav. Mishahu pasol le'edos ba'aveda min ha'aveda shel Torah. If somebody is disqualified from testifying because he did a biblical sin, we'll see in the last book of the Rambam, there's a whole section of laws on testimony. And if somebody does a sin, specific sins, some of them disqualify you biblically, some of them disqualify you only rabbinically. So if you did a sin that disqualifies you biblically from testifying, if he was an expert shochet, he can still slaughter. Because we have a presumption about Jews that if they could, they would choose kosher meat. Guy's an expert shochet. Just because he's biblically disqualified from testimony, he's still going to be a good Jew in some ways. If he could eat kosher meat, he'll eat it. So if he's anyway slaughtering it, he'll slaughter kosher. That's a presumption over all Jews, even the wicked ones, that they would not eat non-kosher given the choice. But those who created other sects in Judaism, the Sadducees, the Baitusim, They were students who didn't believe in the oral tradition, and they created their own Reform Judaism, so to speak. And all those who are misled after them and do not believe in the oral Torah, Shechitasan asura. By default, their Shechitah is forbidden. They're not considered to be fully Jewish. However, if they slaughtered in front of us, we watch them, then it's actually permitted, interestingly. The only thing that's precluding their Shechitah from being permitted is because we're worried that they're going to ruin it since they don't believe in the oral tradition, which tells us all the laws. They don't believe in the laws of ritual slaughter. But if we watch them do it okay, and the bottom line is the result is okay, so it's fine. We can't believe them after the fact to say, we didn't mess up the Shechitah. But if you watch them, it's okay. The Rambam concludes the chapter with an interesting point. When the Jews were in the desert before they came into Israel, they had no commandment to slaughter ritually regular meat which they ate. They would rip open the animal, kill it in whatever way they wanted, and eat it like any other nation. There was a commandment in the desert which was that if you wanted to do proper ritual slaughter, you can only slaughter it as a sacrifice, as a peace offering.
Not to eat.
Yes, you cannot slaughter just to eat. Shenemar, it's a whole series of verses here, but follow the red letters. It says, Ish ish mi beis Yisrael asher yishchat shoyer. Any man from the Jewish people who wants to slaughter an ox, etc., or a sheep, or a goat, whatever, ve'al pesach oyel moyed loy haviyah, and he doesn't bring it to the temple, to the tent of meeting, to the Mishkan, he actually gets karet, v'nichras. If you didn't bring, if you slaughter without making it a sacrifice, you'd get karet. Liman asher yaviu, so that the Jews should bring the goymer all their sacrifices, v'zavchu zivchei shlamim laHashem, and they would slaughter peace offerings to God. If you wanted to eat dinner regularly and just tear open the animal and kill it, that was fine. The commandment was that if you want to slaughter properly, you have to bring a sacrifice. This commandment doesn't apply forever. Only in the desert. When they were allowed to tear open animals, if they wanted to slaughter, you had to be a sacrifice. But in the desert, the Jews were already foretold. They were commanded in the desert that when they're going to go into Israel, ripping open animals is going to become forbidden. And even regular food, regular animals, they would have to eat by process of ritual slaughter. And they would have to slaughter anywhere outside the temple courtyard forever, whenever they wanted to eat something. Shenemar, as it says, this is the verse. When Hashem will expand your land, in other words, you're going to go into Israel and you're going to have your own inheritance, not in the desert. Then then you're going to slaughter all your cattle and your sheep that Hashem gave you, etc. This is the commandment which goes forever, the one we've been talking about for the last 4 days, to first slaughter and then to eat. And when you're outside of the desert, in Israel, and later on for the rest of time, if you want to eat meat as a meal, you have to first slaughter it in accordance with these laws, and then, or only then, are you able to eat it.